Hey guys, it's Christy and welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me. Today we're going to be ranking all of my Anastasia Beverly Hills eyeshadow palettes. So before we get into it, I hope you'll consider subscribing to my channel before you leave. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoy, and let's get into it. So I feel like this is a brand we haven't talked about in quite a while. They did come out with some releases last year, and then the other day I was kind of wondering if they're coming out with anything new anytime soon. I just feel like they came out with a palette back in the fall and then we've heard absolutely nothing. So that got me inspired to pull out all of my palettes from the brand and rank them. So I do have 6 in total. So coming in at number 6 is actually the Primrose palette. So I think this one came out in 2021. And I believe this was their holiday release. And I think this is a beautiful palette. This is such a beautiful color story. And as with most of her palettes, these shades do have quite a lot of kick up. This one I found in particular had so much. But the reason I tend to drop this down is because of these 2 blushes here on the end. I think the outer packaging is super, super beautiful. I think the color story is also really pretty, but these 2 blushes, first of all, there's so much kick up. I could not imagine using them as blushes, but I really think this palette would have been so much better if those were just kind of either, if the palette was either just cut off right here or if the eyeshadows were expanded a little bit. I liked that they made the pan sizes much larger than in previous palettes, but the blushes were just really kind of pointless. So I just really hate that I end up feeling like I'm wasting half the palette. I also feel like some of these shimmers, there is so much fallout with some of them. So for that reason, I am ranking this in a little lower. I do like this palette. I think it's beautiful, but because there is a portion of the palette that gets no use and because there is so much kick up, I'm definitely ranking this one at number 6. Coming in at number 5 is the newest palette from the brand, and this is the Rose Metals palette. So this one, I actually really love the packaging. I love that it's supposed to look like worn leather, and I love the way they've redone their packaging in general to remove the little brush that came with their palettes and just made the pan sizes bigger. I love that. And I will say the formula in here is beautiful. It is such a nice formula. There's still kick up, but not nearly as much as there was in some of their earlier palettes. I think the formula is so great. The reason this one falls lower is because this color story is just really not that intuitive for me. It's definitely more on the grungy side, which it claims to be, so I knew that, and I just don't tend to go for those grungier looks. So for me, this isn't a color story I get the most use out of, but I also, when I look at this palette, I don't fully know what I want to do. I see these 2 pinkier shades, there's some greens, there's some very warm tones, and I just find that I don't know what I want to do. So for that reason, this one's ranking lower. The formula is excellent. The packaging I love. It's just the color story isn't my favorite. Coming in at number 4 is a palette that I used to love so much, and that is the Soft Glam palette. So this one is the perfect neutral eyeshadow palette. This gives you everything you could want. You get all your neutrals, plus you get some pops of color to make it a little more glam. You do get these more pinky tones over here. You get this mulberry shade, which I think is really pretty also. This is such an essential palette. I think it's so great. The formula is so great. I love the looks I come out with this one. It's the perfect neutral palette, and I really enjoy this palette. This is one that I probably don't get as much use out of as I used to, but this is one that I would definitely reach for if I was just having a day where I had no idea what I wanted to do. I would go into this because no matter what I do with this one, I'm going to love the looks that I create. So this one is still a really great palette. At number 3 is another newer palette, and this is the Nouveau palette. So this one came out in the summer of 2022. And this one is really nice. I will say the random pop of purple in here is super beautiful. It confuses me, but it is super beautiful. But when I'm looking at this and I see these greens and some of these more orangey tones, I think it's a really beautiful palette. Much like the Rose Metals, it's not always the most intuitive for me. I don't always know exactly what look I want to create, but again, this formula is wonderful. I love the packaging. I love the new layout. This formula is so good. This is an incredibly blendable formula. And I do always love the looks that I come out with. I do have to think about it a bit more. I don't know how to use the purple in conjunction with some of these others. I have used this purple, but I've had to pull in shades from other palettes. I always super love the green looks I commit with this palette. The shade Lily is so beautiful. So I really do enjoy this. I think it's a great palette. It's not the most intuitive. I had to stick with more monochromatic looks when I do, but that's what I prefer to do anyway. So I just love this palette. I think it's great. The formula is so good. Throwing it back once again with a classic is the Sultry palette. This one is such a classic. So much like Soft Glam, this one is pretty old at this point, but the formula is so good. The color story, this color story was definitely way ahead of its time. This is a very cool tone color story, but before cool tones had their moment. Cool tones really had a moment in, say, 2020, 2021. We were not there yet. This came out in 2018. So this one was definitely ahead of its time. The formula is still really good in here. The shades are so pretty. This is one of my favorite palettes to dig out in the fall. The packaging is still my favorite packaging they've ever come out with, this glittery packaging. This makes me so happy, but this palette is just so good. I really love this one. I definitely don't reach for it very much when I'm filming because, again, it is discontinued, so I try not to use it, but I really do love this palette. I really wish they would have made this one permanent or maybe redo it and re-release it. That would be pretty special too. And finally, coming in at number 1 is actually a Norvina palette, and this is the Norvina Volume 5. This is my favorite. This is a giant purple palette, which you don't expect because I love neutrals so much. This is genuinely the most perfect purple eyeshadow palette. I love how there's, of course, all these purples, but then you get all of these browns to really anchor everything down, but then they have a purple sort of undertone to them. It's really, really interesting. They're so beautiful. They just play so well together. And then there's even this gold shade over here and then some of these pinks, but they just work so well with the purples too. Something that I've mentioned many times is when I go for color, it tends to be more monochromatic looks. I prefer softer makeup. Again, neutrals, monochromatic, but sometimes I do just want some color. And if I see a palette that's got all these different colors, I have no idea what to do. I don't feel that with this palette. This palette does not make me feel overwhelmed with not knowing what to do. So I really do just love this palette. I think it's so great. The formula is so great. Every look I create with this one, I absolutely love. And for somebody who is such a neutral lover who never branches out into color, this makes me so excited to do that. So that is it for me today. Thank you so very much for watching. If you're new here, I hope you'll consider subscribing before you go. I do upload at least 3 new videos every single week. Thank you again so very much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!